The radar screen flickered once, then went dark. Captain Reese Nighthawk Vasquez stared at the blank display, her calloused fingers hovering over the emergency reset button. 30 seconds ago, she'd been tracking 4 unidentified aircraft moving through restricted airspace over Havasu Canyon. Now nothing. Just the steady hum of her F-16's engines and the distant crackle of radio static. Control, this is Nighthawk. I've lost contact with the bogies. Repeat, I've lost radar contact. The silence stretched too long. Control tower at Nellie's Air Force Base should have responded immediately. Instead, Reese heard only the whisper of wind across her canopy and the rhythmic beep of her navigation systems. She banked left, scanning the vast expanse of Nevada desert below. The morning sun cast long shadows across the red canyon walls, creating a maze of light and darkness that could hide anything. Nighthawk, this is Control. We show you clear on all frequencies. Return to base immediately. Something was wrong. The voice wasn't Colonel Martinez, who'd been running the training exercise. This was someone else, someone with an accent she couldn't place. Reese's hand moved instinctively to the small fabric square sewn beneath her squadron patch. Her grandfather's Purple Heart ribbon, faded purple silk that had traveled through 3 wars and 2 generations. She touched it whenever doubt crept in, whenever the weight of being the only woman in her unit felt too heavy. Control, verify authentication. I need confirmation on RTB order. Static answered her. Then, emerging from the canyon like ghosts, 4 aircraft rose into view. Not the F-22 Raptors she'd expected from the exercise brief. These were different, sleeker, more angular, with a stealth profile that made her breath catch. F-35 Lightning IIs, their matte gray surfaces drinking in the desert sunlight. But there was something else, something that made her grip the stick tighter. The lead aircraft bore no visible markings. No squadron insignia, no tail numbers, no nationality indicators. Just clean, anonymous death machines that moved with predatory precision through the morning sky. Unknown aircraft, this is Captain Vasquez, United States Air Force. You are in violation of restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately. The formation tightened, boxing her in with military precision. Reese felt her heart rate spike as the lead F-35 pulled alongside her starboard wing. Through the tinted canopy, she could see the pilot's helmet turning toward her, studying her aircraft with cold calculation. Then she saw it, a small patch on the pilot's flight suit, barely visible through the reinforced glass. A skull with crossed lightning bolts, surrounded by text she couldn't quite read. But the symbol was familiar, hauntingly so. The morning sun blazed across the canyon as 4 predators closed in on their prey, and somewhere in the silence between heartbeats, Reese realized she was no longer part of a training exercise. She was the target. The lead F-35 pulled ahead, its pilot's helmet cocked at an angle that suggested amusement. Through the secure channel, a voice crackled to life, smooth, professional, with just a hint of mockery. "Well, well, little Nighthawk all alone in the big sky. Tell me, Captain, do you remember Operation Blackwater?" Reese's blood turned to ice. Operation Blackwater had been classified beyond her clearance level, a mission that officially never happened. Only a handful of pilots had been involved, and most of them were dead. The patch on her grandfather's ribbon suddenly felt heavier against her chest. "I don't know what you're talking about," she transmitted, but her voice betrayed the lie. The F-35 formation began a slow, deliberate spiral around her position. Like vultures circling wounded prey, they maintained perfect distance, close enough to engage, far enough to avoid her weapon systems. The tactical display showed her disadvantage clearly. 4 state-of-the-art stealth fighters against her aging F-16C in any straight fight. She'd last maybe 30 seconds. "Oh, but you do know," the voice continued, each word measured and precise. "Your grandfather knew. Commander James Vasquez, Navy Cross recipient, Vietnam veteran. He had such interesting stories about his granddaughter's first combat mission. Pity he's not here to see how it ends." The mention of her grandfather sent rage surging through Reese's veins. James Vasquez had died 6 months ago, taking his war stories and his quiet wisdom with him. The fact that these unknown pilots knew about him, knew about her family, meant this was personal. "Control, this is Nighthawk requesting immediate backup. I have 4 hostile aircraft in attack formation." Only static answered. Her radio was being jammed, leaving her isolated 30,000 feet above the desert with no backup and no escape route. The F-35s maintained their orbital pattern, their pilots patient as hunting cats. "You're wondering who we are," the voice mused. "You're wondering why we know about your grandfather, about Blackwater, about the little girl who wanted to fly jets just like Daddy. But the real question, Captain Vasquez, is what you're willing to do to survive the next 10 minutes. The morning sky stretched endlessly blue above the canyon, indifferent to the drama unfolding in its depths. Reese's F-16 hummed with restrained power, every system green and ready. But power meant nothing without somewhere to run, and the canyon walls had become her prison. She touched her grandfather's ribbon again, remembering his words from her commissioning ceremony. "Flying isn't about the machine, Mija. It's about the heart that drives it." The F-35s continued their deadly dance, and Reese began to plan. The tactical situation was deteriorating by the second. Reese's F-16 was bleeding fuel from a microleak in her port wing tank, not enough to ground her immediately, but enough to limit her operational time. The F-35s had noticed it too, their formation tightening as they sensed weakness. "Fuel leak detected," she muttered into her mask, more to herself than to the dead radio. Standard procedure would be to declare an emergency and return to base, but there was nothing standard about her current situation. The lead F-35 broke from the formation, accelerating into a high-speed pass directly across her nose. The pilot's timing was perfect, close enough to rattle her nerves, far enough to avoid collision. A show of superior skill and aircraft capability. As the stealth fighter flashed past, Reese caught another glimpse of that skull patch. This time she could make out additional details. Wings behind the skull, a date that looked like 2019, and text that read Ghost Squadron. "Impressive reflexes," the voice commented as Reese instinctively pulled up to avoid the jet wash. "Your grandfather would be proud. He had the same instincts during the Mekong River incident." The reference made Reese's jaw clench. The Mekong River incident was family legend. Her grandfather's F-4 Phantom had been jumped by 3 MiG-21s over the Vietnamese jungle. He'd managed to shoot down 2 before his wingman arrived, earning the Navy Cross and a reputation that followed him through retirement. "You seem to know a lot about my family," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Ghost Squadron knows everything about everyone who matters. Your grandfather's war record, your father's early retirement from the Navy, your mother's work at Skunk Works. Even your little sister's acceptance to the Air Force Academy." The mention of her sister, Alina, sent a chill through Reese's chest. Alina was supposed to be safe at the academy, studying aerospace engineering and dreaming of following in her big sister's footsteps. The implication was clear. This wasn't just about her. "What do you want?" she asked, banking left to maintain position in the center of their formation. "Simple. You're going to follow us to a predetermined location. You're going to land your aircraft intact, and you're going to answer some questions about your current assignment." Her current assignment. Reese's mind raced through the possibilities. For the past 6 months, she'd been working test flights for a new avionics package, classified, but nothing that would warrant this level of attention. Unless there was something about the project she didn't know. The F-35s began descending toward the canyon floor, their formation loose but controlled. Reese had 2 choices: follow them into whatever trap they'd prepared, or make a run for it and hope her aging F-16 could outmaneuver 4 of the world's most advanced fighters. The canyon walls rose around them like the ribs of some massive beast, red sandstone carved by millennia of wind and water. At this altitude, the geological formations created a natural maze. Dozens of side canyons, hidden valleys and box canyons that could hide an entire air force, or serve as a perfect place for an ambush. "Nighthawk, you're falling behind," the voice noted as Reese allowed her F-16 to drop back slightly. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She wasn't falling behind. She was buying time, studying the terrain, looking for any advantage the landscape might offer. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Always know your battlefield, Mija. The ground can be your greatest ally or your worst enemy." The lead F-35 waggled its wings, a signal to maintain formation, and Reese realized her time for planning had run out. Whatever was waiting at the bottom of the canyon, she was about to find out. She touched her grandfather's ribbon one more time and followed the ghosts into the depths. The canyon floor rushed up to meet them, a tapestry of red rock and shadow that seemed to swallow sound itself. Reese's altimeter spun through 5,000 feet, then 4, then 3. The F-35s maintained their loose formation, but she could see their air brakes deploying as they prepared for whatever came next. At 2,000 feet above the canyon floor, the lead aircraft transmitted new coordinates. "Nighthawk, you'll see a small airstrip in the next valley. Natural rock formation, camouflaged hangar. Land there. And if I refuse, then your sister Alina never makes it to her advanced navigation class this afternoon." The threat hit like a physical blow. Reese's hand moved instinctively to her emergency beacon, but she stopped herself. Activating it would bring search and rescue teams into the same trap that had claimed her. Better to play along, gather intelligence, and look for an opportunity to escape. The airstrip appeared exactly where the voice had indicated, a natural shelf of rock that had been enhanced with concrete and painted to blend with the surrounding sandstone. The hangar was a masterpiece of camouflage, its entrance carved directly into the canyon wall. Sophisticated, expensive, and completely invisible from above. "Impressive," she admitted despite herself. "Ghost Squadron doesn't do anything halfway. You'll find the approach challenging but manageable. Your grandfather landed on carrier decks in typhoons. Surely his granddaughter can handle a little desert runway." The backhanded compliment stung more than an outright insult. Reese had spent her entire career fighting for respect, proving herself against pilots who saw her gender before her skill. Now, even as their prisoner, she was being measured against her grandfather's legend. The landing was indeed challenging. The runway was short, the approach angle steep, and the crosswinds treacherous. But Reese's F-16 touched down with barely a chirp of rubber on concrete, her training and instincts taking over where conscious thought failed. As she taxied toward the hangar, she counted aircraft, 6 F-35s in total, all bearing the same skull and lightning bolt insignia. 2 were being serviced by ground crews who moved with military precision, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. The operation was professional, well-funded, and definitely not amateur. "Shut down your engines and step out slowly," the voice commanded. "Keep your hands visible at all times." Reese followed the instructions, her mind cataloging every detail. The hangar's interior was larger than it appeared from outside, carved deep into the living rock. Computer terminals lined one wall, their screens showing real-time satellite imagery of the surrounding desert. On another wall, a large map displayed flight paths and target coordinates that made her blood run cold. The lead pilot approached with helmet still in place, his stride confident and predatory. When he finally removed it, Reese found herself looking at a face she recognized from classified briefings. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Wraith Blackwood, formerly of the 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron, officially killed in action over Syria 3 years ago. "Hello, Nighthawk," he said, his smile cold as winter steel. "Welcome to the real war." The hangar felt like a tomb carved from red stone, its ceiling disappearing into shadows that seemed to swallow light itself. Reese stood beside her F-16, hands visible but ready, watching as the other pilots emerged from their aircraft like specters materializing from another world. Blackwood circled her slowly, his eyes taking in every detail of her flight suit, her squadron patches, the slight tremor in her hands that she couldn't quite suppress. He was older than she remembered from the briefings, gray threading through his dark hair, lines around his eyes that spoke of too many missions and too little sleep. But his movements still carried the fluid grace of a fighter pilot in his prime. "You're wondering how a dead man can fly," he said, nodding her recognition. "The answer is simple. Sometimes being dead is the only way to be truly alive." The other pilots formed a loose semicircle around her, their faces a mixture of curiosity and professional assessment. She counted 6 in total, all carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of combat veterans. No names on their flight suits, no rank insignia, nothing to identify them beyond the skull patches that marked them as Ghost Squadron. "What happened in Syria?" Reese asked, buying time while her mind worked through escape scenarios. "Syria was a lie," Blackwood replied, his voice carrying the weight of old betrayals. "Just like Iraq was a lie, and Afghanistan was a lie, and every other war we've been asked to fight for politicians who have never seen the inside of a cockpit." He gestured to the map on the wall, its red lines and target markers telling a story of global conflict that stretched far beyond any single nation's borders. "We were sent to eliminate a terrorist cell that supposedly had surface-to-air missiles. Instead, we found a wedding party, 43 civilians including 12 children." The number hit Reese like a physical blow. She'd heard whispers about Syria, about missions that went wrong and pilots who asked too many questions. but hearing it from someone who'd been there made it real in a way that classified reports never could. "So you went rogue," she said, the pieces beginning to fall into place. "We went honest," Blackwood corrected. "Ghost Squadron fights the real war, the one where innocent people matter more than political agendas, the one where pilots like your grandfather would recognize the enemy." The mention of her grandfather sent another spike of anger through Reese's chest. "Don't you dare invoke his name. He served his country with honor." "And what country is that?" Blackwood's voice grew sharp. "The one that sends pilots to kill wedding parties, the one that covers up war crimes and decorates the survivors, or the one that your grandfather actually fought for, the one that stood for something more than corporate profits and political convenience?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a crashed fighter. Reese had spent her entire career avoiding such thoughts, focusing on mission parameters and chain of command rather than the larger questions that kept some pilots awake at night. But standing in this hidden hangar, surrounded by dead men who'd chosen to live again, she couldn't escape the implications. "You're terrorists," she said finally, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "We're pilots," Blackwood replied. "We're what fighter pilots become when they remember their oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant hum of electronics and the whisper of recycled air. Reese's grandfather's ribbon felt impossibly heavy against her chest, a reminder of simpler times when enemies wore different uniforms and fought for different flags. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Information," Blackwood said, "about the new avionics package you've been testing, about the kill switches built into every system, about the remote override protocols that can ground entire squadrons with a single command." The words hit like ice water in her veins. Kill switches, remote overrides, technologies that could turn any aircraft into a remotely piloted drone, stripping away the human element that made fighter pilots more than just weapon systems. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied. Blackwood's smile was sad rather than threatening. "Your grandfather would have said the same thing, right up until the moment he realized his country was asking him to become something he couldn't live with." The hangar's shadows seemed to press closer, and Reese realized she was no longer just a prisoner. She was standing at a crossroads that would define not just her future, but her understanding of everything she'd believed about duty, honor, and the price of wearing wings. Outside, the desert sun climbed higher, indifferent to the revolution being born in the depths of a hidden canyon. The computer terminals cast pale blue light across the hangar's stone walls, their screens cycling through intelligence reports that painted a picture of global conflict Reese had never imagined. Satellite imagery showed unmarked aircraft operating in restricted airspace over 3 continents. Financial records traced weapons sales to countries that officially didn't exist. Most disturbing of all, personnel files displayed the faces of pilots she'd known, some dead, some missing, some transferred to classified assignments that now seemed far more sinister. The Prometheus Project, Blackwood said, nodding her attention to the screens. That's the real name of your avionics package, not the advanced tactical display system you've been told about. Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. He gestured to one of the terminals, where technical specifications scrolled past in streams of code and engineering diagrams. The system you've been testing isn't just navigation and targeting. It's a complete override protocol that can assume control of any aircraft in the field, turn friendly fighters into remote-controlled missiles, ground entire squadrons with a single command, transform the world's air forces into a puppet show controlled by whoever has the master codes. The implications were staggering. Reese thought about the late nights she'd spent in the simulator, testing response times and system integration. She'd wondered about some of the subroutines, the additional processing power that seemed excessive for simple navigation upgrades. Now those questions took on a much darker significance. "You're lying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Blackwood pulled up another screen, this one showing her own test flight data. Flight 347 Alpha 2 weeks ago. You reported an anomaly in the control system. A 3-second delay between your input and aircraft response. The official report blamed software lag, but look at this. The data stream revealed what the official report had omitted. During those 3 seconds, the aircraft had been under remote control, following commands from an external source. Her F-16 had been a puppet, and she'd been too trusting to see the strings. "How many other pilots know?" she asked. "That's what we're trying to find out. The test program has been compartmentalized, with different squadrons testing different components. You've been working on the core override system. Others have been testing the communications protocols, the satellite links, the fail-safe mechanisms. None of you seeing the complete picture." The betrayal cut deeper than any enemy fire. Reese had trusted her commanders, believed in the mission, accepted the secrecy as necessary for national security. Instead, she'd been helping to build a system that could turn every pilot into a remote-controlled weapon. "Colonel Martinez," she said, thinking of her squadron commander. "Does he know?" "Martinez is dead," Blackwood replied quietly. "Killed in a car accident 3 days ago, along with Captain Stevens from the 482nd and Major Williams from the 509th. All pilots who'd started asking questions about their test assignments." The news hit like a gut punch. Martinez had been a mentor, a tough but fair commander who'd backed her when others questioned her qualifications. The idea that he'd been murdered for asking the wrong questions made the betrayal complete. "Show me," she said. Blackwood nodded to one of the other pilots, who began pulling up additional files. Accident reports, medical examiner findings, police statements, all painting a picture of convenient deaths that eliminated inconvenient questions. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Ghost Squadron was born from pilots who discovered the truth, Blackwood explained. "We faked our own deaths, disappeared from official records, and began fighting the real war. The war against the people who would turn us into remote-controlled killers." The moral clarity was seductive. After years of following orders without question, the idea of fighting for something pure and simple held tremendous appeal. But Reese had learned to be suspicious of easy answers, especially when they came from people who'd already proven capable of deception. "What about my sister?" she asked. "Was that a real threat?" "Elena is safe," Blackwood assured her. "But she won't be if you return to Nellie's and report what you've learned. The people behind Prometheus don't leave loose ends." The choice was becoming clear. Join the ghosts or become one. Return to a world where she'd be marked for death, or disappear into a shadow war where the enemy wore her own nation's uniform. Neither option offered the simple certainty she'd once found in military service. "I need time to think," she said. "Time is what we don't have," Blackwood replied. "Prometheus goes online in 72 hours. After that, every fighter pilot in the world becomes a potential weapon in someone else's war." The hangar's shadows seemed to deepen, and Reese realized she was standing at the edge of an abyss from which there would be no return. Her grandfather's ribbon pressed against her chest like a weight of judgment, and she wondered what he would have done in her place. The answer came to her with startling clarity. He would have chosen the hardest path, the one that led toward honor even if it meant giving up everything else. "All right," she said, "I'm listening." The briefing room was carved from the same red stone as the hangar, its walls lined with maps and intelligence reports that painted a picture of global conspiracy. Reese sat across from Blackwood at a table that looked like it had been salvaged from a military surplus store, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed from burnt motor oil. "The Prometheus project began 18 months ago," Blackwood explained, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much. "Officially, it's a joint venture between the Department of Defense and several private contractors. Unofficially, it's the first step toward creating a global air force that answers to no single nation." He gestured to a wall map covered in red pins and connecting lines. "The technology is being tested simultaneously in 12 countries, all under different cover stories. Enhanced navigation systems, improved targeting computers, advanced communication protocols. Each country thinks they're getting an edge over their neighbors. None of them realize they're all being fitted with the same remote control system. "Who's behind it?" Reese asked. "That's the trillion-dollar question," Blackwood replied. The money trail disappears into a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts, but the technology itself tells a story. This isn't the work of any single government or corporation. It's too sophisticated, too well-coordinated, too perfectly designed to exploit every weakness in modern air defense systems. He pulled up another screen, this one showing organizational charts that resembled a hydra more than a traditional command structure. "We've identified key players in the defense industry, intelligence agencies, and military hierarchies. But for every connection we uncover, two more disappear. It's like fighting smoke." The scope of the conspiracy was overwhelming. Reese had joined the Air Force to serve her country, to protect American interests and democratic values. The idea that those same values were being subverted by people wearing American uniforms was almost too much to process. "What's the end game?" she asked. "Control," Blackwood said simply. "Imagine a world where every military aircraft can be controlled from a single command center, where wars can be fought without pilots, without national armies, without the messy complications of human conscience. Push a button, and enemy fighters simply fall out of the sky. Push another button, and they turn on their own ground forces." The implications were staggering, not just for military conflict, but for the entire concept of national sovereignty. If one organization could control all military aircraft, then traditional concepts of borders and independence became meaningless. "How do we stop it?" she asked. "We start by destroying the test program," Blackwood replied. "Every prototype, every data file, every piece of hardware that makes Prometheus possible. Then we expose the truth to the world, starting with the pilots who have been unwittingly helping to build their own obsolescence." It sounded simple, but Reese could see the challenges. The test program was distributed across multiple facilities, each with its own security protocols and backup systems. Even if they could destroy the hardware, the technology existed in the minds of the engineers who'd created it. "You're talking about a war," she said. "We're already at war," Blackwood corrected. "The question is whether we fight it as soldiers or as slaves." The distinction was important. Soldiers chose their battles, died for causes they believed in, left behind legacies that honored their sacrifice. Slaves simply followed orders until they were no longer useful, then disappeared into the machinery of someone else's ambition. "How many pilots are with you?" she asked. 43 confirmed dead," Blackwood replied. 12 more in deep cover, gathering intelligence from within their original units. 6 here in the desert, maintaining our operational capability. It's not enough to win a conventional war, but it's enough to strike at the heart of Prometheus. The numbers were daunting. 43 pilots against a global conspiracy with unlimited resources and institutional backing. But Reese had learned that battles weren't always won by the largest army. Sometimes they were won by the most committed. "What about families?" she asked, thinking of Alina. "That's the hardest part," Blackwood admitted. "Everyone we recruit has to choose between their personal connections and their duty to humanity. Some choose duty. Others choose family. We respect both decisions." The choice was becoming clearer, but no less difficult. Stay with Ghost Squadron and accept that she might never see her sister again. Return to Nellie's and live as a marked woman, knowing that her silence made her complicit in a crime against every pilot who'd ever trusted their aircraft with their lives. "I need to contact Alina," she said. "That's not possible," Blackwood replied. "Any communication would compromise both of you. But I can tell you this. She's safe as long as you're officially listed as missing in action. If you return to Nellie's, that protection disappears." The weight of the decision settled on her shoulders like a flight suit made of lead. Everything she'd worked for, everyone she'd cared about, balanced against the possibility of preventing something that could change the nature of warfare itself. She thought about her grandfather's stories, about the choice he'd made to volunteer for the most dangerous missions in Vietnam, not because he loved war, but because he understood that some fights were worth the risk. "All right," she said, "I'm in." The transformation began immediately. Within hours of her decision, Reese found herself in a different world, one where her old identity had to die so that something new could be born. The process was both literal and metaphorical, starting with the destruction of everything that could connect her to her former life. Her F-16 was the first casualty. The aircraft that had carried her through 100 training missions and 3 combat deployments was systematically stripped of every useful component, then pushed into a sinkhole that would hide it from satellite surveillance. Watching it disappear into the desert felt like attending her own funeral. "It never gets easier," said Captain Maria Viper Santos, the pilot who'd been assigned as her transition mentor. Santos had been officially killed in a training accident over the Pacific 6 months earlier, but her death had been as carefully orchestrated as her resurrection. "I still dream about my F-22 sometimes. The way she handled in a climb, the sound of her engines at full throttle. These F-35s are impressive machines, but they're not the same." The technical differences were significant. The F-35 Lightning II was a multi-role fighter designed for stealth and versatility rather than the pure air-to-air combat that had defined Reese's career. Its systems were more complex, its flight characteristics more forgiving, its weapons load more diverse. Learning to fly, it would require unlearning years of F-16 muscle memory. The biggest adjustment is the helmet, Santos explained as they walked through the aircraft preparation ritual. Full heads-up display, night vision integration, target tracking that follows your eye movements. It's like flying with superpowers, but it can also be overwhelming. The temptation is to rely on the technology instead of your instincts. The helmet in question was a marvel of engineering, $100,000 piece of equipment that turned the pilot into a cyborg fusion of human intuition and electronic precision. But as Reese settled it onto her head for the first time, she couldn't escape the irony. They were using the most advanced technology in the world to fight against the people who'd created it. First flight is always disorienting, Santos continued. The F-35 flies differently than anything you've experienced. More stable, more predictable, but also more removed from the pure flying experience. It's like the difference between riding a horse and driving a car. The comparison was apt. Reese's F-16 had been a barely controlled explosion that required constant attention and adjustment. The F-35 felt more like a computer that happened to have wings, its systems managing everything from engine performance to weapons targeting with minimal pilot input. "How do you maintain situational awareness?" she asked. "You learn to trust the machine without surrendering to it," Santos replied. "The F-35 will tell you everything you need to know about the tactical situation, but it won't tell you what to do about it. That's still up to you." The distinction was crucial. Technology could provide information, but wisdom came from experience, training, and the indefinable quality that separated good pilots from great ones. The challenge was learning to use advanced systems without becoming dependent on them. "What about maintenance?" Reese asked, thinking about the complex logistics of keeping stolen aircraft operational. "That's our biggest vulnerability," Santos admitted. "We have 3 crew chiefs who came with us, all of them officially dead. But F-35 maintenance requires specialized tools and parts that aren't available on the black market. We've had to develop relationships with sympathetic personnel at official bases, people who believe in what we're doing enough to risk their careers." The network of support was impressive and terrifying. Mechanics who provided parts, intelligence officers who shared classified information, even commanding officers who looked the other way when aircraft went missing from their inventories. The conspiracy against Prometheus had grown far beyond the original group of rogue pilots. "How many people know?" Reese asked. "More than you'd think," Santos replied. "The military is full of people who join to serve their country, not to become remote-controlled weapons. When they learn the truth about Prometheus, most of them want to help. The challenge is identifying who we can trust." The trust issue was paramount. One betrayal could destroy the entire operation, exposing everyone who'd risked their lives to join the resistance. But without new recruits, Ghost Squadron would remain too small to make a significant impact. "What's our first target?" Reese asked. "The Prometheus test facility in Colorado," Santos replied. "It's where they're integrating the override systems with the satellite communication network. Destroy that facility, and we buy ourselves months of delay while they rebuild." The mission was ambitious. Penetrate one of the most secure military installations in the world, destroy critical infrastructure, and escape without being identified. It would require perfect planning, flawless execution, and a level of trust that most pilots never developed with their wingmen. "When do we leave?" Reese asked. "Tomorrow morning," Santos replied. "Welcome to the real war, Nighthawk." The pre-dawn darkness over the Colorado Rockies was absolute, a black canvas that swallowed sound and erased the boundary between earth and sky. Reese flew her F-35 through the mountain passes at near-suicidal speeds, following terrain features that existed only in her memory and the whispered guidance of her radar altimeter. "Ghost Leader, this is Nighthawk. I'm at Checkpoint Alpha." Her voice was steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. 3 weeks of intensive training had taught her to trust the F-35 systems, but flying at 200 feet above jagged peaks, in complete darkness, pushed even advanced technology to its limits. "Copy, Nighthawk. Viper reports checkpoint Beta secure. You're cleared for approach Vector Charlie." The Prometheus facility materialized out of the darkness like a cancer of concrete and steel carved into the mountainside. From above, it looked like any other military installation: guard towers, vehicle checkpoints, rows of administrative buildings. But the intelligence reports painted a different picture. Deep beneath the innocent-looking surface, engineers worked in climate-controlled laboratories to perfect the technology that would make human pilots obsolete. "Facility security is standard," Santos reported from her position on the southern approach. 2 F-22s on alert status, but they're configured for interception, not ground attack. Guard rotation follows the predicted pattern. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. 3 F-35s would approach from different vectors, using their stealth capabilities to avoid detection until the last possible moment. Precision-guided munitions would eliminate the critical infrastructure, while minimizing casualties among personnel who might not understand what they were really working on. "Remember," Blackwood's voice crackled through the secure channel, "our target is the Prometheus hardware, not the people. These are our fellow Americans, many of them good people who have been lied to just like we were." The moral distinction was important. Ghost Squadron fought to preserve the humanity in warfare, not to eliminate it. That meant taking risks to avoid unnecessary casualties, even when those casualties wore the uniforms of their enemies. Nighthawk, you're cleared for final approach. Target Building 7 Alpha, Sublevel 3. Viper will take Building 4 Charlie. Ghost Leader handles the communication array. The F-35's targeting system painted the facility in digital detail, identifying structural weak points and calculating the precise munitions required for each target. But as Reese lined up for her attack run, she couldn't shake the